Hello, everybody, and welcome to GlugNet. My name is Stephen Ball, and I am the president of GlugNet. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Adam Broadbent, who will be talking to us about API architecture that will lead us to success. But before we get started, a little bit about us. We are the Greater Lansing user group for .NET developers, based out of Okemos, Michigan. Our meetings are free and open to the public, held every month on the third Thursday. The best way to find out more information about us and what we have coming up is to visit our meetup page, meetup.com/glugnet. Typically, our meetings are recorded and posted to YouTube by Sam Nasser. You can find his channel by either using the QR code on the screen here or going to youtube.com/@SamNasserMVP. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We are always looking for lightning talks before our featured presentation. Tonight, Matthew Hess is with us, who will be giving us a lightning talk. If you have a talk like Matthew and want to do it before one of our meetings, you can contact either Joe Kunk or myself, and we would be happy to slot you into a meeting. Also, our presentations tonight are designed to be interactive. We encourage asking questions, or if our speakers have any questions of us, answering those. If you are unable to or uncomfortable speaking, we understand that's possible as well. There is a chat feature in GoTo that we will be monitoring for questions. We just ask if you are not asking a question or answering a question, that you please stay muted. That way we are not interrupting the presentation for everyone else. At the conclusion of tonight's presentation, there will be a survey made available to all attendees. That survey will be open for 24 hours, and it's looking for feedback on two primary areas. First of all, how did we as an organization do getting the word out about this event? Second, the presentation itself. What did you like? What didn't you like? All feedback received for both sections is completely anonymous. So please leave us your feedback, whether it's good, bad, somewhere in between. We want to hear it because that's the way we grow and that's the way we're going to do better in the future. So the QR code is right here if you want to grab your phone and get that up on your phone now, or there's a link here that will be shared in the chat at the end as well. And so please consider giving us some feedback. We would greatly appreciate it. Our sponsors for tonight, NIS Technologies, who is providing this go-to session, and the .NET Foundation for their financial support of GlugNet. And the slide says featured presentation, but first we will have our lightning talk.
So last month, thank you again for inviting me, you all. I really enjoyed getting to come and talk to you. And last month, we talked a little bit about pattern matching switch expressions. That is actually taken from a full hour-plus long talk that I give called These Are a Few of My Favorite New-ish C# language features. I realized I should probably sing that, but I'm not gonna. And so tonight, I want to pick off another one out of that talk. But before I do, I just want to mention, if you want to connect with me, you can take a picture of this QR code and connect on LinkedIn. If you would like to go to my YouTube channel, and I know you would, right? You want to go watch the videos and like and subscribe, do all that stuff. Well, it's here, the C# Artisan YouTube channel. And if you want to just email me, I sometimes look at csharpartisan@gmail.com. So that's where I've got too many windows up. Okay, a quick acknowledgement also. My employer, I work for CG Infinity. It's a consulting shop out of Plano. It's a great place to work. They're very enlightened as an organization, and they're super supportive of me doing this kind of stuff. So thank you, CG. And here is the full agenda when I do the full talk. So last time we did pattern matching switch expressions. Today, I know that in the published materials it said I was doing lambdas versus delegates, but I decided just to change my mind without telling anyone. So we're going to do value tuples today. So that's what we're looking at. And I think we have time for that one and possibly one other, but let's just do value tuples. Now, let me go back. I'll put that up. All of this code is here, github.com/C#artisan/favorite new features. So you can download it, and it's just a little console app. And when you run this console app, it brings up a menu where you can just pick which of the little code examples you want to look at. So today we'll be looking at value tuples. You can select it and run it. The idea is you would just set a breakpoint here in the code, and you can watch it run and learn about it. So it's very simple. Okay, there's the preamble. Let's talk about value tuples, or maybe they're tuples. I've heard it both ways. The word comes from the word multiple. And a tuple or a tuple is a value type, right? It's stored on the stack. So it works kind of like a date time or an integer or other primitives, except that, oh, I did not want GitHub Copilot to do anything. Thank you. Except that a tuple or a tuple has multiple pieces to it. It's a little bit like kind of an array. It's like a value type that has subtypes. So one of the main use of this that I have is helping solve the problem of how do I return multiple values from a function. So if you write a C# function and you want to return one value, that's easy. That's your return type. If you want to return more than one, well, you've got a little problem to solve. And the way we did this in C#2 was with out parameters. So here is an example showing you how to use out parameters, which I'm sure you all know, especially if you've used like try parse or some of the framework functions that use out parameters. The way this works is what you've got here is here's my input, a date, and I've got 3 out parameters, the month, the day, and the year. And it's up to the caller to define those and pass them in. And then we get to set our values here. Month equals day, year equals date.year. This is classic.
Is he breaking up for anybody else?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it just froze too. Okay, it wasn't just my machine, so we're good.
No, it sounds like he's having some bandwidth issues.
Wonder where he is. It did just start raining where I am.
I believe he is based out of British Columbia, but depending on if he's traveling, it could be like a hotel Wi-Fi scenario or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Don't know about that.
Big process of coming up to speed on all the C# stuff I had missed. So this was a really fun thing. I was like, wow, that's cool. And I use it quite a bit. Okay, so here is an implementation of our date parts concept using a tuple. So public, static, and here it is. There's the declaration of the type. It is in parentheses. These names are called field names. They're optional. You can take them out and it'll work just fine. But if you put them in, then both you and the caller can kind of keep track of things a little better. So there's the tuple. And when we use the tuple, we simply return it, and you just say, oh, there it is. Return, open paren, month, day, year. So that's how you use a value tuple. I really like this as a way to return multiple values. I've never really much liked out parameters. I found them to be clunky. Now, if there's more than about 3 or 4, with a class anyway, because at this point, you're really talking about a lot of data. So it gets kind of unmanageable to handle all of that in individual variables. But you could. But if I'm talking about 2 or 3 values, this is my go-to. Just define a tuple. So the last thing you need to know if you're going to use these is how C# handles tuple equivalence. So if I created 2 of these classes, like date parts 1, date parts 2, and even if I gave them the same month, day, and year, if I said, are they the same? Are they equivalent? C# would say no, because they're different objects. Now, if they were declared as records, it actually would say they were equivalent, because for records, equivalence is done using the public fields and properties. So that is, that's important to know. But for a tuple, it works like a record. Basically, tuple equivalence is based on the values. It's not a pointer to something on the heap, right? It's a value type. So if I say T1 is use a tuple right now, and T2 is use a tuple right now, T1 is going to equal T2 because the month, day, and year of these 2 will be the same. The time component of date time now is different, but unless we happen to split midnight between these 2 lines, they're going to be the same. So let's go ahead and run that demo again like I did right at the beginning. Maybe. There we go. And I'm going to choose option 3. And you can see that they are equivalent. So it basically got to that line of code, showing you that they're the same. So there you go. Value tuples. Maybe you knew about them, maybe you didn't. Hopefully a few of you learned something and can put that to good use. That's it. Lightning.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew? All right. Okay, you should be presenting now, Adam.
Thank you, Matthew, for doing that. I think it somewhat blends well into what I'm, we talked about tonight too. Anyway, so at least for one section of it and stuff. So I appreciate that. But thanks everyone. A little about me. I'm an aspiring community organizer. I have a group called Lansing Codes. We have I'll give a little plug that you should see on Meetup. I just put it up there now, but it's an event we're doing called For Lightning Talks. So Matthew, you have to be in person, unfortunately, for my group, but it would have been perfect for you. But we're doing just lightning talks yeah.
Let me know, and if I have a little budget someday, maybe we can do something in person. I am going to Detroit later this year, so who knows?
Okay, yeah. This will be July 15th, so if it works out, I would love to have you over. But this is an opportunity for anyone who would like to speak and just practice, presentations. If you have a topic that you're just interested in telling others about, we try to keep it informal. In the summer, sometimes it's hard to get people together. So I figure if we get everyone together that likes talking about stuff, then we'll have a good time. And we did this a couple of months ago, and it was a blast. So I'll do a couple so that no one has to feel nervous if they come and there'll be no one talking. So at least you'll get me for like 2 lightning talks, maybe at most. But I hope that we can get a great group of people out there that are just interested in sharing something. And last time it could be just even if you have an idea of something that you wanted to kind of run by people, it could be anything. But anyway, so I'm trying to do that, and I love the .NET group here. So this is all part of my trying to help the Lansing community continue to grow and be a part of that. And so also a co-founder of MadeLabs. It's a software consulting company. I think we specialize in building like applications that just kind of like wow people. I think I like taking old applications that don't look so great and then making them so much better, And I'll have a job with AI one day, but until then, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I have a lot of fun doing it. So it's good. I get the code sometimes. These days I'm in Lucidchart and Jira and those kind of things a lot more than I am in the code, but I try to and still get to do PR reviews and things like that, which is nice. And I'm a big fan of barbecue. So if anyone feels like they would rather have us talk about barbecue instead of code, I'm happy to switch the presentation over to that as well. So that's good. I also like doing home automation. I haven't done a lot of it recently because it's a very expensive hobby, but I do enjoy automating things to make my life a little bit easier. But I try to do it all in a way that does not bother my wife, where she says, "How come my lights are randomly turning on and off?" and all those things. So, and then I like drinking by bodies of water. I'm really, really good at this. I can drink by pools. I can drink by lakes, by oceans, by rivers, you name it. I'm really, really good at drinking by water. Uh, so I like to do that with other people too. So if you enjoy that passion as well, I'd love to do that with you sometime. Um, so what we're going to look at here is we're going to work on an API for an application, and then because of my love of barbecue, that can keep track of barbecue sessions, can keep a series of notes, log what's happening during the cook, and all along the way, we're going to try to solve some common application development problems, maybe some things I see. So what you see on the right there is a picture of my Kamado Joe. It's a big Joe, and my daughter helping me out seasoning the chicken on the rotisserie. So kind of fun. So when we have an outage, what's the root cause of that? Yeah. I think you probably have all kind of ideas, but I say like a bad developer is the one I hear a lot of time. Like they often say, who can I blame for what's going on here, right? And the way I look at it is there are developers that are doing like a really, really complex, hard problems, and they can cause bugs. And then there's other ones that are doing the like just changing the spelling error that's there. And I don't like to blame like a developer because of like doing something that's really hard, or and then say the other developer's great because they were just doing like a simple text change. So I think we have to look deeper than the code, than the first thing of being a developer anyway, at least, right? Poor testing sometimes comes up, right? We hear that as like, who tested this, and how come it didn't happen? But that's another one where I think to myself sometimes, why don't or I think, I know I've done it, and I'm sure other people have. We've released code to QA at 4:00 on the Friday at the end of the sprint, right? And those are the kind of things that isn't fair to QA, honestly, right? And so if they are forced to try to make us have a successful sprint, they've got to test and get things done fast and stuff, and that's not really fair, I think, to look at it that way. We could say it's awful requirements too, right? Those things happen where we just they got it wrong, but I think of us, how many of us have gone and done commits or worked on something else during sprint planning or during some kind of workshops, like those things happen too. And so it may be our own fault that we're not, helping to contribute to that. So, but the correct answer, everyone knows who's a developer, at least, is the infrastructure team. That's the real problem, like all these, right? And I kid, but I always have firewall changes, and those seem to break the application sometimes. And so, like, why all the firewall changes? That's all. It's my little soapbox for a second. Anyway, but I believe that architecture can help us with these outages, and so I like to think like, what could we address maybe with architecture changes? And so I'll go through a little bit of a list here. Like forgetting to assign properties in update cases is something that we could see. Being lost in a new code base, maybe. And we'll go into deeper into each of these, so don't worry too much. But accidentally saving data to the wrong field, breaking existing code by adding a feature, and don't know where a bug is, and adding logging too late, during an outage is too late a lot of time, right? And code complexity grows over time with new features. So these are all things that I've seen, and these are stuff that I think that there is an architecture solution to this, and we'll go through those things now. So let's explore the API. I'll be going through this through slides, but if there's any case where you'd like to see the code, I should be able to pull it up. And at the end, I'll show you like a real world application of this stuff too. So anyway, that'll be fun. So we'll start with a typical N-tier application. The goal here is not to say that this is a really bad application and that we're going to make it better. It's just that this is like a typical good application, I think. I just think there are things that we can do that help developers be more successful when they're working in the code base. So what you see here is that we'll have an API project, an application project, and a data access project. So those are all ones that make sense. And then on the right, you see that that's just a list of the whole screen. I just thought might be too small to see, so just making it a little bit bigger over here. But in here, with the API project, you have the typical things like controllers or middleware, in the application, you'll have your common DTO, mapping profiles, the services, and then data access. You'll have like your repositories, persistence layer, identity, those kind of things. So, and by the way, if anyone has any questions along the way, please feel free to jump in or stop me or anything like that. I'm happy to talk about anything that you see on any of these things or ask questions about. So what we'll do here is we'll just use the Swagger UI to do this API for us and everything like that. But what we're doing in this one is that I am creating a pulled pork, a barbecue session where the description is pulled pork. And then when I hit execute, I'm getting back an ID that we're going to copy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a session note where I'm putting in that ID that we got. I'm going to say is the grill up to temp is the activity, and the note is no white smoke. And I like to create 275 because I find that works best for my grill. It just likes to make cleaner smoke at a hotter temperature. So that's why I put 275, and when I don't see that puffy white smoke, I know that it's like we're good and it's gonna hopefully taste good. So when we do that, we get back, we can go and query now for our sessions, and you can see that we have our sessions here. Like I season the meat, and then we just like we showed, they got up the grill up to temp. But we have a bug. And we see that the created by and created on both of these are actually null and have the default created on date. So not ideal, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But this goes to our first one of our issues that we want to do, forgetting to set common properties in update cases maybe. So I want to show you this is how we typically would work with this. We would just be saying, go to your DB context, go to the BBQ session, add and do a new barbecue session where the description is pulled pork, and then we do save changes. And that results then in our having null and these. But what we can do is you can do override your save changes. And then what we have here is that we have a for each statement, which is going through the change tracker and looking for all the audited entities. So this is just an interface that expects to find a created by, created on, updated by, and updated on. That's all. And so we're looping through those. And then if the state of the entity is added, we're going to go to this claim service. And this is just where I'm injecting the authentication, or at least the authenticated user in this case, to be able to get the user ID. And then just do date time now. And if it's modified, we do the same thing, just set the updated by and updated on instead. So that's all it's doing. Now what happens is you end up getting like maybe the user and a date or whatever it is. And what's nice about that is that happens all the time on anywhere that you save something that has a interface for this audited entities, which is nice. This is just an example of that call again, right? Where now we have the created by and created on being filled in. So that's the same thing. And so now we see that got fixed. So that's good. Next, we go being lost in a new code base. So what we saw here with what we have set up is that we're organizing everything by folders and the folders by type. So you see here in the DTOs, we have like a barbecue session. In the mapping profile, we have a barbecue session. In the services, we have a barbecue session. And so it's all these locations that, it's spread out by each type because these are DTOs, mapping profiles, and services. Same thing for session note, right? And then the user and things too. But one of the options that we can do instead is to organize by use case. And what's nice with that one is that we can now say, I could maybe make a use case folder, have a barbecue session as a folder, and then within there have the create barbecue session, get all, update, and then have a barbecue session profile, the session service, all those things that are in all together. So if you need to find something related to the barbecue session, you would just go to this folder. If you needed session notes, you go to this folder. And then another option that we're going to do, and this is like, we're going to get more into what Mediator is, but we can actually then separate even this barbecue service that we have here into commands and queries that are in this. And so then we can have the creates have everything together where it's the command, the response object, and the validation all in one folder. So kind of nice to be able to find everything, I think. And the way I view some of this stuff, it's kind of like or I heard a story anyway saying that if a developer wrote a book, it would be chapter 1 characters, chapter 2 scenes, chapter 3 plots or something, and that's kind of like a joke on how it goes, of course, but it's just because of the way that we structure by type and things like that, where this is like a little bit more of like maybe a traditional book could be. But I also think of it like as someone who worked in databases a lot of my career, and when I started off my career, I often thought of things and from the database entities kind of point of view. And what I like about this approach is that it makes me think a little bit more about the use cases of the user as opposed to how I'm going to structure that data. And so that helps me like think about what are they doing in the system. They're creating a session, they're deleting, and this is still CRUD, so it's not like a really great example, but think about it as like being able to set up to whatever the use cases of your audience is when you're building your application, and then it helps you structure the database that way, I think, which has been good. So next we have accidentally saving data to the wrong field. So this one is kind of related to what Matthew went through with us, but this case is what I have is I have a meat pit temperature that's, like I said, 275, and then the meat temperature of like 95 degrees. And then when I do update temps, in this case I put the meat temp and then the pit temp, but we look here at the signature of this, and we'll see that it goes pit temp then meat temp. But the thing is, they're both decimals, right? So it's kind of hard to pass, to know that you got this wrong until you actually run it, see that it's saved in the wrong field, or your users do, and they tell you that you have a bug. There are things that happen within the IDE and the tooling to help us see if we're putting the right field, because you can often see the signature right there and stuff. So this isn't like, every case happens, but I think it's something that it is easy to mix up parameters. Bugs are hard to spot at compile time. I think that's all valid. So one option is you can use something called a value object, and this is kind of like a concept from DDD. But what's neat about it is I can use like the C# record type, and I can say pit temp of this decimal value, and then a record for meat temp of the rest decimal value. And then what happens is instead of just setting 275, I say new pit temp of 275 and new meat temp of 95. And now when I try to pass this in, it makes sure that I put it in the right order. And if I didn't, I'd get red squiggly lines and everything like that right at the time of this, and it wouldn't compile. And so that's kind of like a nice way to just make sure that you have it right. And advanced cases of value objects, I've done things like, and I think I have some of it I can show you, like some money, things where, there's cases where you want to just make sure that like in the case I was doing, we were trying to obfuscate money things in logging. And so like there's things where you can use these, to make sure that you override the toString, and that they can say this is an actual money object to make sure that when you log, you're not logging financial information or something maybe. Lots of things that there's just more advanced use cases of value objects that are pretty powerful, I think. But this is a simple example, but hopefully inspires some ideas, because I think it's pretty cool. So next is breaking existing code by adding a feature. So start with this, and this isn't meant to be like red, but I just want to show you this. Like service has a lot of stuff in it, right? And this is pretty common. Over time, you keep adding functionality and adding stuff to the class, and it keeps growing and growing. I've seen a couple things what's challenging with that. You have a lot of dependencies to inject sometimes. That's hard. I think just making sure that you're not breaking someone else's code when you're doing your code is hard in this, but this is all things that happen. So this is just one method in our large service. So this is that create method, and we basically do some validation up front. We're just saying is the length less than the minimum length, then throw this validation exception, or if the length is greater than some maximum length, throw this exception. Build up our barbecue object, our barbecue session, and then call our repository and just say add async this barbecue session, and then return a barbecue session response, right? So it's not like a overly complex and hard one, but there's a number of different things happening in this method that we can break out into other things. So here's an example of if we were using Mediator, and again, I'll go into a little bit more, but what this one's doing is that you have your command at the top, and this is, or request, is really what it is. But I call commands when they're saving and queries when they're reading. But this is where we're passing in the description, the user ID, and the tenant ID. And then we have a request handler that expects that barbecue session command and in this response, the barbecue session response. And so then you have a handle method that expects the same command, and then it returns what's in the response as a task. But then all we have here is make this the session, call the repository, and return our response. So none of the validation code in there. That's because we moved the validation to fluent validation, and that's partially not you have to use fluent validation. I just have liked that before because it gives you a little more readable thing. So you can say minimum length of this field with this message, maximum length with this field. And there's a lot of stuff that makes it more readable. But what this is an abstract validator for our barbecue command session command, right? And so if I go back one, you'll see here that we have that create barbecue session command here, and that's what it is. And so whenever that gets called, this validator will run and make sure that our session is valid, barbecue session is valid, which is nice. So we're able to abstract that out to a separate class, and this validator could be tested independently of the main code. And so you could, make your testing even simpler too, and stuff, which is nice. So here's some basics so we can understand how some of the mediator works. And two, for those who haven't used it, this I've used mediator, but it's by Jimmy Bogard, who does AutoMapper, which everyone's heard of and stuff. So he's a pretty, reliable guy to build cool stuff. But there's a lot of libraries that do mediator pattern. There's Wolverine, that's pretty popular now. There's like mass transit and service bus all do the mediator pattern, I think. And so it's there's ways to implement other spots, but this one's just a pretty simple one. But what you have here is requests. Then that's where I make commands and queries, to do oftentimes, but it's all just a request object in mediator. And all that is just a class, really, in a lot of ways. It has an interface of saying that's an iRequest, right? And then what you have for that is that you have a single request handler. So for every request, there's a single request handler. That makes it really easy to kind of know what code's being executed. Because when we go into the apps, I'll show you how it gets ran a little bit, and you can see that it's just using like a send option, and that's just not it's not our normal F12 kind of related, jumping into code. Mediator is kind of like the idea of me saying I just want to do something, and then having somebody else take care of sending it to the right person. And so that's what's happening in here. And then what they have is this concept of a pipeline, and so you can have behaviors on this pipeline, which is kind of neat, and we'll go into some of those in a minute. So in this case, we have like maybe an API, or this is how I'm using it. You'll have like a request coming in to your API. We'll make that command or query object, send it to mediator, and then mediator will determine the right place to send it based on what that request looked like. So let's do the send email handler maybe, right? Or maybe you do the create order handler, but it won't do both, right? It only goes to one handler in the requests, at least. And that's kind of where the logging and the validation and stuff happens and stuff for us too there. So then don't know where the bug is, and adding logging during outage could be too late. So in this case, what we can do is use one of those behaviors that we just saw in the way mediator was set up. So if we go back here, this behavior. So what we're doing here is creating a logging behavior. And this is a iRequest preprocessor. So mediator has some of these things to say, do you want it to process before the handler's called? Do you want to process this after the handler's called? Or do you want to call it before and after, which is called a pipeline handler? But this one's a preprocessor that takes in a tRequest object. And then we have the logging behavior, which has a task method in it that says process, and it processes these generics of the request object. And then all we're doing here is just saying get the request name, use that claim service to get the user ID, and then just use, in this case, we're just using the logger to log information and just say the barbecue request was received. And what's nice, because this is a behavior, it means that every time we add a new feature, it gets added. So here's the idea: is we have the existing feature, we have the logging behavior, and then we have our feature handler. So we automatically get a log happening if we have the right logging level set, because that we did log information. So you can always turn that down if you don't care about all these logs all the time. And then during an outage or during a problem, turn it on or something if you feel like it. But we have that there. Then when we get a new feature with a new handler, the developer doesn't have to write any new code. This logging behavior automatically just gets us brought in, put on this too. So they get that logging just by default, and they don't have to do anything to get it. And so I think that's kind of a nice thing to be able to do, is just to make it so that it's not like part of your necessarily a PR review or having to have, knowledge to do that. It's just something that you can set up in your architecture to say, let's have logging happen on all these requests without any developer having to do anything. So that's pretty neat. And when I get into a real application of it, you'll see a little bit better in the code how this all works together. But so just if you're interested in Mediator and things like that, it's really easy to add. You just do services and then say add Mediator, and then you can register those services. And so like normally I just use the class that we're in presently, where the handlers are located. You just use that, or not class, but the project that it is. And then you can add behaviors like this one. I can show you in the main code, but we have like performance behaviors, which are pipeline behaviors. And then that logging behavior we just did is this iRequest preprocessor. So you just register it and then say there what service and then what implementation you're using. So that's pretty good. And then that's how we did our validators. And these are all the user service, claim service, all those things, email too. But it's really pretty straightforward to add Mediator, because you're just registering all the different handlers in this one line, really. And then behaviors you have to add individually, whatever there. I think that might be changing in a newer one, but I think that's how I had to do it. Code complexity grows over time with new features. So with this one, like in this example anyway, instead of adding new code for a new feature, so like in this one we're doing adding in the email service and then injecting it into here, and then adding in a line that says, after we've added this in, let's send this email. And so what's, okay in this case because it's small and it's easy to see, but you can imagine if we keep on adding features and other things onto this could be a lot, especially adding email into here, because it's maybe better to have that centralized or have it in another place or something. So anyway, I think there's another way to do this that I like a lot, actually. We're going to be taking advantage of a feature in Meteor called notifications. So like I said, with requests that they have, requests have a single request handler. Notifications are nice because they have notifications have many handlers for it. So that's good for things I think like events, because you can say something happened and now a whole bunch of other things can spin up to handle that. So this would be like creating a barbecue session, go to the session handler, create an event, and then have all these event handlers that would pick it up, like sending an email, adding to CRM, saving a backup to S3, or sending out a notification, maybe. These are all things that are extra code you could add on just by creating a session and publishing a domain event called barbecue session created event, or this notification anyway, right? And that's kind of neat, I think, because again, test this individually, right? Add new features without adding any new code to here, and that's pretty cool, I think. And so this is how I sometimes do the events, is that you have your barbecue session, create barbecue session folder, which has your command, your response, and your validator. This will have the handler in it. I put the command and the handler in the same thing, and then have an events folder where I have the created event and then all your handlers right next to it. So again, easy to find, keep them together. So you have the code close, but not keeping updating the same method over and over. That's the idea on that. And then here's what a RU session created domain event or a notification looks like. So there's lots of ways to do this. What I'm doing here is I'm just making a payload, and then what we're doing is we're setting that payload to the barbecue session itself. I think like it's okay to do this. I think the only thing you have to be concerned is if you end up sending this through some other message bus as opposed to being just in memory, which is what Mediator is. You may need to think about the size. There's certain size limitations, and you may want to send back just the ID of what was created. You don't have to send all the information. Just sometimes it's easier to send it all and then refactor or change if you need to in the future, because then you have all the information you want. Other times there could be not necessarily security things, but if you just knew that you didn't want to give everything out to your consumers of this data, you could always make another object that was like a smaller data DTO or data transfer object that you would send off to them maybe. But this is what we do. So it's really pretty straightforward because all it is a class again, right? All we're doing is creating a class and just saying it's of type iNotification, right? And then we just store our data in it, right? So that's all. And then to send out these events, what we're going to do is, like in this case, is our handler for that create barbecue session. We do the same, build up the entity for the barbecue session that we want. And now what we do is on that session, we can add a method onto that to be able to say add domain events. And then we can just do a new create barbecue session. And then you see this is barbecue session created. I think that's important in a lot of these event things to use past tense. So the commands are I'm doing this, your events are I did this, but they'll have that, and then what we'll do is just do the add async and then do the create barbecue session response and stuff. And then here's what we do with the base entity. So back on this, when we did this add domain event, this barbecue session is a base entity. And then that base entity class, all we do is add in this list of domain events, and then have the add domain event and clear domain events, which all it does is just go to this list and say add that domain event on. So pretty easy, but that's nice because then you can have this just attached with your entities. And then what it allows us to do is continue adding to our override the save changes, where we did that change tracker where we're setting the created by and last updated by. You'll have this, you can have this method here that goes and gets those events from the entity that's in here right now, and then call save changes, and then dispatch the domain events. I found I like to go and get the events, then save the changes and do the things. It's just to make sure that I can get all the information and that everything's in the database before we tell all of our extra services that may go pick this up to go look for it in case they needed to make sure that it was already saved or got an ID back or something like that, that we might need. So I just do that pattern a lot of time of getting and then dispatching. And then this is what the extension method looks like essentially for that get domain events. All we're doing in this one is as long as the context isn't null, we just keep going through there, and we'll go through the entities and then get the change off the change tracker. We'll look for the base entity type, and we'll say where this has domain events, then get that entity off those. And then for each of these entities, go and pull the domain events out, and then clear the list of domain events since we don't need those anymore. We've gotten them, right? But all we're doing is just looping through the change tracker for these base entities that are part of the save changes request, and then returning those as domain events. And then what we saw after the save changes, we do the dispatch domain events, which all that's really doing is looping through those domain events that we got, already from here, and then just doing mediator publish. And so publish is what you do for notifications, send is what you do for requests. So. And then here's what a notification handler would look like. So you see this is a class that this one says barbecue session created email handler. So barbecue session created and then email handler. It's a I notification handler for the barbecue session created. And then in this case, we have a email service that we're injecting. And then all we have is a handle method with the same created event and then a cancellation token. And then now we can do in this method here, have a real simple one that just says, call the email service, do the send email, and then send the message and use the ID maybe from the payload that we got in this notification, event here. So, so nice. Again, another spot that could be tested, that could be, not adding new code in order to add new features. And so this is kind of how you do it, is with these events and things. That looks good. So, all right. Let's look at a real application. Before I jump into this application and stuff, any questions or anything like that? Anyone needs me to repeat anything? Go back and there's something.
Yeah, looks like you got one in the chat here. Is there a way to automatically get a visual representation of the flow of messages and requests, like your slides with the gray boxes and arrows?
I'm not aware. I think that, I'm sure there is, but I don't know for Mediator what that is. I believe that, I remember N-Service Bus having some tooling that you could, it's additional. It's not out of the box as far as I know, but there were tools that could do that to help you see the flow. I think it'd be more of an operational tool to kind of see if things were getting stuck or something like that. Then, but are you thinking of an architecture diagramming kind of thing to help you understand that, or are you thinking of more monitoring real-time usage? Either one, I think. Like an overview, yeah. That I don't know of any tooling that does the overview, but they may exist. If not, good project probably. Good, but I don't know of it. But good question.
Yeah, I've got one as well, Adam. So those events that you're using, I assume that's all
Yep.
pub sub, right?
It is, and that's the idea with this kind of a thing. You have a publish and then all your subscribers, and so it's a fan out kind of an idea, where the request, and request handler is more of a request response, but just with a mediator between them. So there's no real knowledge of who is handling this to the request thing, But the notifications, you don't know who is either, but it's that fanning out. It is all in memory, and I think by default it's done within the same session as the save. So if there's an exception, it would bubble all the way up. That can be good. If you wanted it to not care, there are ways, I think, to do that. I can't remember right now exactly, but I think if you want it to be async is really what it is. It could treat it async, but they're all synchronous as they go. So it can add time to your request too. That's the other problem if you're having it synchronous, because you're still doing all the operations. I just like the separation for the individual, and then you can always optimize it in the future and stuff if you need to.
And are those events also inherited? Like you mentioned, if you put in a new feature, the behaviors will automatically pick up in your new feature. Do the events as well do that, or is there a need to hook those up with each new feature?
Yep, they do exactly the same. As long as you do the barbecue, like in this case, a barbecue session created, they would all pick it up. In fact, I'll go back to this other one here. So the idea here, this is a barbecue session created event, and just by adding another handler for this particular event, it would just start running, and it would start getting
Gotcha.
So pretty
Gotcha.
nice. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Cool. Anything else? Love questions. So yeah. Cool. All right, I'm going to share something else. Let me try that. Okay. Let me close some things down a little bit so we start fresh. But I know this is going to be really tiny on the side. How overall is this for people seeing? Is it? I don't know much I can do about the side over here, but hopefully when the code comes in, Or let me pull something up. Is that okay size? Or go bigger?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Happy to try to change it anyway. So, all right. So this application is one that we actually built called Fairview. It's an internal thing that we were playing with. It's a project management, but with like financials and trying to just help companies like understand the cost of projects that they were doing and things like that, really. So it's kind of interesting and something I could maybe go through some other time. But right now, I'm just going to focus on the API because that's what I like to geek out on and things like that. So there's a few things that I think I want to show here. That we have we have docs folder, a source folder, and a test folder. So we have integration tests that can go through. That's pretty neat. I don't want this to grow and change too much on you, but one of the things I want to show you is I like these things called ADRs. I don't know if everyone's heard of them, but they're kind of like architectural decision records. Documentation's the bane of my existence a lot of time, and I think like being able to keep it up to date is really, really hard, you know? So I write documentation and I like it, but it's just really hard to keep things up to date. What's nice about ADRs is this is not how to do something, it's why you did something. And why you did something doesn't change. And so it's really nice that if I go up and I pull up this like API solution art structure, you'll see this ADR that says API solution structure in the project, and then you have statuses, and I think all mine say proposed, but they should be accepted. But who decided it, when we made the decision, you have like a context problem. So you're starting a new project. How do you want to organize the solution file? We have decision drivers. So you can say like developers enjoy working in it, sets developers up for success, sets Fairview up for growth, and then options considered. So we can say we did N tier, clean architecture, fat controllers, and then you have your decision outcome, clean architecture, because clean architecture meets the decision drivers, is well documented in books, online, Pluralsight, and videos. And then positive consequences, we have like each project has its own distinct purpose, API for handling the requests on the client, domain for all the application code, infrastructure for the details that aren't concerned of the domain, all kinds of things like that. So, and then negative consequences, I won't go through each of these, but pros and cons of each. But the big thing to me is that as a new person coming in, you could go through and read this and know why we chose it. And then you could come out and say, how come you didn't do hexagonal architecture? Well, it wasn't one we considered on this, right? And that's the thing, or whatever the case that you want. And we could always write another ADR that says, would we considered some other architecture now, and things like that. So that's kind of nice. And so there are just things that you just keep adding these sequential numbers on, and then you can come up to the top and say this supersedes by another one. So, but cool. So anyway, that's just something that as a side that I just really like ADRs. So, but I don't know, Rich, if this is the exact same thing for it, because this is more of like your decisions that you're making, and so maybe AI would make the right decisions and things. But I think like it's still really good to to use AI to help you understand the code base and document it and things. But maybe that's a good way to keep it up to date too.
Quick question. I looked away for a second. What does ADR stand for?
That's an architectural decision record. So.
Okay.
Yep. And so that's just what we're trying to say is just why we did this, and that's a good thing I think to be able to do for a lot of other developers that are working on your project, is like, here's why we made that decision. So.
All right.
Yep. Cool. So that's some of the documentation parts there anyway. In the source code thing, we have an API folder, domain folder, infrastructure, project, all these things like that. So what I like about this is that if you look at the dependencies of like the domain, it has a dependency on the domain, this infrastructure project, for instance. So this is clean architecture. But when you look at the dependencies on the domain, there's no dependencies on any other project. So that's clean architecture where everything's pointing inward. That's a whole nother talk sometime if we want, but that's just something that I really liked about setting this up. And anyone who's worked in dependency hell can appreciate some of the benefits of having clean architecture and having those dependencies point in and stuff. So in here we have controllers. We also have Signal R put in, so you have like hubs. So we have a client message hub. I can show you a little bit of that in a bit. But the controllers are this one I'll do. Controllers are pretty light, but there's lots of ways to do this now with like I was blanking on the names of them. But anyway, this is just using classic controllers instead of gosh, what is the name? Well, whatever. But like in this create method, you have like in this case we're doing like an input DTO, and then we get the tenant ID and the user ID, and then we can do this create project command where we pass in that tenant ID, user ID, and input, and then a cancellation token. And then this is what we're saying with mediator, we just do send. And so the problem with that is that when you do F12, it tries to figure out where it's going, but you're just going to mediator's source code, right? You know, that's not the most easy developer experience. So what I do is I put the command, and then when you go into the command, which is right here, you know, at the top, there's a command handler. And like we said with the command handler, it just goes and has a handle method that takes that project command in. And then here's where we have like the logic and things like that that we're running for this method. But you see what we were talking about earlier about the domain events. So I have like a project created event that we add to the project and then do save changes. And then when you go into the save changes, you see we have like some other helper things like ensure audit history. So this is just one that is like a helper method that goes and puts entries in of a previous value and new value kind of table. It's not the best for like end user audit history, but it's a good one for internal logging. I think like internal use when you want to know like what happened and how something changed. This audit history is nice. And you'll see here really what I mean by that. It's like this entity state. If it's added, it just sets the new values to that properties. If it's modified, you have the old values and new values. But it's just a table that has if it was modified, added, or deleted, and then has those new and old values. So that's something else that's kind of nice. Whoops, I went too far with these, but so we have the audit history, and then just like we saw in the presentation, there's this get domain events, which let's just sync it, get over here. Common, no. But that's the method that we were using to go and get those domain events. Then we just do the save changes, and then we do the dispatch domain events. So, and then here we're doing interceptors in this case to do the auditing entity. So a little different option, but another thing you can do in any framework is to set these auditable entities in this interceptor, which does the same thing as what we saw in the other ones, but it just does if I am doing added, set the created. If I'm doing, updated, set if I'm modifying, do the update one. But it's just doing through a entity framework interceptor, that one. The controllers, when you call those, they go into the domain. And the domain we have it right now, it's like a big folder of all our stuff, you see? So I encourage people to separate these, but what I didn't want to have happen is people separate them by entity. I wanted it to really be by use case. And so we have the use cases, but I think then you want to kind of figure out like your audience and try to keep things together in case you ever want to split this out separate applications. But it's not real hard to find anything. And you can think if this was in one large logic or a couple of them, how hard it might be able to find. But now we have the create project. And then just like I showed before, we have the command and the validator. So you see the validator right here where we have these rule 4 tenant ID, that it is a tenant ID, and rule 4, this estimated completion date is greater than the estimated start date. So fluent validation is nice, and it's just right next to the project. And so you could, again, test this one separately. And then you have your command that we were looking at earlier, like that. So that's kind of nice. When those events get dispatched, like in the save changes, we have a folder in here right now, is how this one's set up, that has an events folder. And then we have some that are kind of interesting because you can see, like there's some that are more for examples, but this is what you were talking about, Stephen, I think, is that we have this project created event, and all it has the base event. And then you see we have like a Dynamo handler, an email handler, an insight handler. And these are just like logging, but it's just the idea that this is using a project created event and this email handler project created event, and so all you do is add another, event handler, and that way you can keep adding new functionality onto this. And one of them that we added on, which is kind of simple but nice, is that we have a base event SignalR handler. And so this is a handler where we're expecting a generic that is of an I base event. So all these events are a base event that are all an I base event. They're all this interface that expects you have an entity, an ID, a parent, and a tenant. So that's what this handler does, which is kind of nice because the other handlers, when you look at them, like we look at that project created one here, right? It's a I notification of that particular event. And so then this one is an I notification of a generic. And then what this does is that there's that handle method, and then it says, if I have a tenant ID on this, then create a new client message, and then use this client message bus, which we injected in here, to send this message to all the tenants. And then we just log some information that happened. But what this means now is that every time we add another domain event in here, we can always have that SignalR go and send that out to anyone if it has a tenant ID. And so what this means is that if Steve and I are logged in at the same company into the application and I make a change, he can get notified on his browser that it happened, and that's pretty cool. If you're in a different company, and not that, then you wouldn't see that, notification and things. But the client message bus is pretty neat. That's up here. It's really simple. Just anyone who hasn't worked with SignalR, they have this on connecting. We just add the tenant ID of the user to a group. So we just group everyone by tenant ID. So that allows each person that logs in to get this, who has the same tenant, to be able to be in the same group. And then on disconnect, we remove them from the group, right? And then in the services, we have the client message bus, which all this does is that send to tenant method that we've had before. We do hub clients group, and then take that tenant ID and then send the message to this method, which right now just notify. And this is actually then calling JavaScript on the client. So there's a JavaScript method called notify, and that method's going to get the message. And so what we have in ours is just a big freaking switch statement, I think, in there that has all these different things that would go through and do. But it's pretty cool. So what's that, Rich, about the race conditions? He's thinking about like the getting notified from the client, and or how we prevent race conditions, like two people working. Oh, I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it can be where if we're both working in the same thing, you could get notified and get updated screens before you save, so you don't override someone else's changes. So yeah, for sure. We do a lot of refreshing. It could be messages that are sent. It really just depends on what we want to do in that notify method, but it certainly is. I've worked in event sourcing things where being able to notify the client that it's done is really good, because when you're working in event sourcing, you have like projections that run, and they're a little bit slower than your like normal request response. And having SignalR be able to notify the front end that it's finished, makes for a much better user experience. So yeah. So that SignalR stuff's pretty good. Pretty much everything that we had in the presentation part of this I can show in here to some degree, because this is where I started, and then I said, I should make it a presentation because I like what we did in a lot of this. Slightly varied different, but at least you can see real world, what we did in putting these in here. I think one of the other things I like, that it's more a clean architecture thing, but you see how we have like the services here, and this is a iMessage bus. In the common interfaces, we have the iClient message bus here. So that's in the domain, but the implementations in the project, and this is nice, not just for this one, but also for like this current user service, because all that the service here knows about is that there's a user ID, tenant ID, and email. But when you look at the current user service here, it has an HTTP context and all the things that I would rather keep in my API project. So I'm not bleeding and having to inject into my dependencies or whatever, or bring in stuff that's in here. So it's just kind of a nice way to use your interfaces here. And then what we have is the configure services in each of the projects. So this configure services is for things that are in the API. And then there's a configure down here in the domain. So it's all the things that are related to domain. And then infrastructure has its own configure services also. So you can kind of set up all the things that are required for each project in each one, which is nice. You just have to do a little bit of stuff on the API in the program CS, where we say call the API one, call the domain, call the infrastructure. And this isn't ideal because it means there's dependencies, but I just feel like it's like a pain in the ass to try to work around that. So I still let this one have knowledge of the infrastructure and the domain, when ideally you wouldn't know about the infrastructure, but it's only to make this call. That's it. So any things anyone wants to see in this project or talk about more or drill into? Okay. Let me jump back to the presentation real quick. Okay, so let's review. For getting to assign a common property in update cases, we used identity frameworks, save changes, and then ensuring audit fields are set automatically, right? So that was like one of the things we looked at. Being lost in new code base, we saw the folder structure where we saw by type versus by use case. I think we can see some benefits to helping people find things by putting it by use case. Breaking existing code by adding a simple feature. So mediator request handlers and new functionality, new code when we saw those notifications and those things. So that's good, I think. Or at least being able to break it up by request and then not having everything in one big method, right? So like I say, a big premise I think is great is new functionality, new code. Adding logging during an outage is too late. So mediator has those behaviors, and then we can do like common logging, we do performance, you can do authentication, you can do a lot of things that you want to just make sure happen on every request. And anytime someone adds a new, handler or new, request handler, then they automatically get those behaviors. Accidentally saving data to the wrong field. That's where we saw those value objects helping to, prevent bugs by using primitives, so we can actually add a little bit more context to those simple things. But really all we did was wrap the primitive, and that made it a little bit easier to work with. So yeah, that's when I could have shown you a little bit more stuff, I guess, in the app if we want to later. And code complexity grows with new features. And so that's where that notifications in mediator, we can decouple side effects. And that's how I like to use it a lot of time, is if it's something that happens because of this happening, you can just separate it out instead of having it be a if block or anything in your main code base. So good stuff. So that's it. So that's all of it. Any questions? Happy to connect, and that's should link to my LinkedIn if anyone chooses to reach out. But yeah, happy to be able to go over this stuff with you guys, and hope that you learned a little bit. I know a few of you have seen this presentation before, so thank you for sitting and watching it with me. But doing this with me. But hopefully it sunk in the second time, or you have new questions the second time. So.
All right, thank you, Adam. Any questions for Adam?
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't have any specific questions, but definitely some things that I've not seen before and I'm looking to implement to solve some problems I've got.
Cool. Well, I encourage everyone to think about the architecture and trying to solve an outage over blaming a person. That's the core message on this stuff. And I do want to emphasize here too. These are not like the only things you can do by any means. This is just to help to inspire ideas. And so I hope people think about what they could do in their own applications with your own kind of problems and how architecture can help with that. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam. Much appreciated. The
Thank you.
link to that survey is in the chat. So if everyone here could please fill out that and leave us your honest feedback. We want to know how we did and where we can grow from here. So we would greatly appreciate the feedback.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great
Thanks,
rest of
Adam.
your evening.